Look closely at your daily choices, your sudden bursts of anger, your silent anxieties, and the invisible weight sitting directly in your chest. Now, accept a terrifying psychological reality. Almost none of it belongs to you. You are currently living inside an intricately engineered cognitive trap, a massive socio-technological apparatus designed specifically to farm your focus, exploit your primal biological vulnerabilities, and profit directly from your emotional instability. Civilization does not want you strong, self-governing, or mentally untouchable. A sovereign mind is dangerous, it cannot be easily marketed to, it cannot be effortlessly managed, and it refuses to blindly follow collective hysteria. Instead, the modern matrix requires you to be hyper-reactive, perpetually anxious, and deeply addicted to external validation. Every notification chime on your device, every subtle undertone of disrespect from a peer, and every artificial standard of success projected by society is a calculated behavioral stimulus. When you react to these stimuli, when a single text message ruins your afternoon, or a passive-aggressive remark from a coworker sends your mind into a spiraling loop of imaginary arguments at midnight, you are committing absolute psychological suicide. You are willingly handing over the executive control of your neural circuitry to an outside entity. You are demonstrating that your mind can be completely operated by anyone who knows which emotional button to press. This state is known in behavioral psychology as a completely outsourced locus of control, where you are reduced from a sentient human being into a mere biological reflex. You believe you are making independent choices, but in reality, you are simply executing a pre-programmed script written by your manipulators. The ancient masters of dark Stoicism understood this systemic vulnerability thousands of years before the advent of modern algorithms. They recognized that the human mind left unfortified naturally becomes an open target for interpersonal dominance and emotional enslavement. To break this hypnotic cycle, you cannot rely on mainstream, watered-down self-help protocols that tell you to simply visualize positivity or suppress your natural survival instincts. You must undergo a violent, structural re-engineering of your entire subconscious operating system. You must build what historical archetypes referred to as the Inner Citadel, an unbreachable mental fortress where external chaos is completely separated from your internal execution. We are about to decode the 10 non-negotiable laws of dark Stoicism that will permanently alter how you perceive reality, dismantle your fragile conditioning, and grant you an asymmetric psychological edge over your environment. The final law, which we will uncover at the very end of this operational breakdown, contains a psychological mechanism so volatile that it can completely isolate you from conventional social conditioning, rendering you entirely immune to human malice and emotional betrayal. But you cannot bypass the structural sequence. The foundation must be laid systematically, law by brutal law, starting with how you handle the very people who are actively trying to destroy your peace. To establish absolute psychological dominance over your environment, you must first master the art of tactical detachment. The people around you, your competitors, your toxic peers, and even those within your immediate social circle, are constantly running subtle behavioral diagnostics on you. They throw out small provocations, passive-aggressive jokes, and micro-insults simply to observe your subconscious reaction. They are looking for a twitch in your facial muscles, a sudden shift in your vocal pitch, or a desperate verbal defense. These microsignals provide them with an accurate map of your insecurities, allowing them to calculate exactly how much power they hold over you. This brings us directly to law number 1, the principle of strategic contempt. When an adversary attempts to undermine your authority or insult your competence, your survival brain immediately triggers a surge of adrenaline, urging you to fight back, argue, or correct their misconception. This biological reaction is a catastrophic strategic error. The absolute second you engage in an adversarial dialogue, you validate that person's status as an equal. You signal to their ego and to the observers in the room that their words possess enough psychological weight to alter your emotional baseline. Dark Stoicism offers a chilling, highly sophisticated alternative. You do not respond with counter-aggression because anger is still a form of investment. Instead, you deploy strategic contempt. This is the calculated science of absolute ego starvation. When targeted by a provocation, you do not shift your posture. Your facial expression remains perfectly flat, resembling an emotionless void. You execute what behavioral analysts call optical fixation. You do not look at their eyes in anger. You look completely through them, as if they are a transparent pane of glass or a minor ghost occupying space. You allow a heavy, suffocating silence to stretch across the room for 3 to 4 agonizing seconds. Because the human brain desperately requires a feedback loop to validate its actions, your absolute lack of response forces the aggressor's mirror neurons to misfire. They do not get the satisfaction of an emotional reaction, nor do they get the validation of an argument. The psychological trap instantly reverses. The aggressor is left standing in a vacuum of their own making, feeling exposed, socially awkward, and deeply unprotected. You have defeated them entirely without firing a single verbal shot. Once you have learned to starve the external adversary, you must turn your attention inward to dismantle the deepest vulnerability within your own neural circuitry. This is law number 2, the law of absolute autarky. In political philosophy, autarky refers to a state of total economic self-sufficiency, completely independent of foreign trade. In the realm of dark psychology, absolute autarky is the state of total emotional independence from the human collective. The modern individual is a psychological slave because their self-worth exists on an extreme pendulum. When society praises them, they experience a massive surge of dopamine, their chest expands, and they feel secure. When society ignores them, their cortisol levels spike. Anxiety sets in, and they spiral into deep self-doubt. This dependency is the ultimate leverage point for anyone who wishes to control you. If you rely on another person's compliments to feel powerful, you have implicitly given that person the power to destroy you tomorrow by simply withholding those compliments. A dark Stoic cuts this neural cord entirely. You must realize that praise and criticism are actually the exact same currency. They are merely outside opinions generated by flawed, self-interested entities. You must reconfigure your internal operating matrix so that both variables carry a value of absolute 0. When someone applauds your achievements, your pulse must remain completely unchanged. When someone mocks your ambitions, your trajectory must not shift by a single millimeter. You become your own supreme validation system. By eliminating the craving for external approval, you effectively strip your environment of all emotional leverage. You become completely unmarketable, unmanageable, and utterly untouchable. However, true psychological fortification requires you to anticipate not just the passive criticisms of the crowd, but the active malice of those closest to you. This forces us to execute law number 3, the tactical premeditation of betrayal. The vast majority of men who experience deep psychological breakdowns do so not because of the physical weight of a tragedy, but because of the element of surprise. When a long-term business partner steals an asset or a trusted confidant leaks a private secret, the emotional shockwave fractures your cognitive processing, leaving you paralyzed for months. You are not crying over the lost utility, you are mourning the destruction of your naive worldview. To prevent this internal collapse, Dark Stoicism adapts the classical concept of premeditatio malorum into a cold system of absolute situational awareness. Every single morning before you connect to the digital matrix or step out into the competitive landscape, you must sit in absolute silence and conduct a clinical mental simulation of treachery. You must tell yourself with cold certainty that the people you smile with today possess the biological capacity to betray you tomorrow if their survival metrics or self-interests demand it. This is not paranoia. It is a calculated acknowledgement of base human nature. You mentally visualize your closest allies breaking their promises, your competitors deploying underhanded tactics, and your plans falling into absolute chaos. By running these scenarios through your subconscious mind beforehand, you effectively vaccinate your nervous system against the trauma of reality. When a betrayal eventually occurs, and if you play a high-stakes game, it inevitably will, the event does not register as a catastrophic emotional emergency. Your heart rate remains perfectly flat, because the treachery has already been factored into your operational calculus months in advance. You do not waste a single second on anger, vengeance, or emotional grief. You simply look at the betrayal as a neutral data point, turn to the next page of your pre-calculated contingency plan, and execute your strategy with machine-like precision while your former ally expects you to be broken in the dark. Once you have insulated your inner matrix from the emotional traps of the human collective, you must master the operational laws that govern asymmetric psychological warfare. Most individuals navigate their professional and personal hierarchies under the delusion that communication is always a tool of connection. They believe that by explaining themselves more clearly, projecting warmth, or constantly communicating their intentions, they can secure safety and respect. This naive assumption is exactly why they remain low-status targets in any highly competitive environment. This introduces law number 4, the execution of the silence vacuum. In the hidden architecture of human social behavior, speech is very frequently a defense mechanism driven by deep-seated anxiety. The average person cannot tolerate an empty space in a conversation. A prolonged pause triggers an instinctive fear of social rejection, causing them to immediately fill the void with nervous laughter, unnecessary explanations, or fragile small talk. When you understand this vulnerability, silence ceases to be a passive absence of sound and becomes a highly aggressive weapon of interpersonal dominance. When you are faced with a direct confrontation, a high-stakes negotiation, or a passive-aggressive attempt to cross your boundaries, you must systematically execute the silence vacuum. You stop speaking. You do not offer an explanation, you do not justify your actions, and you do not provide an emotional counterargument to soothe the tension. You simply lock your gaze onto the center of their forehead, maintain an entirely neutral expression, and let the pause stretch across the room until it becomes physically uncomfortable for everyone present. As the silence deepens, a profound psychological panic begins to manifest within your opponent's subconscious mind. Because you refuse to provide them with the verbal feedback loop they desperately need to calibrate their next move, their brain instinctively assumes that you know something they do not, or that you are completely unbothered by their leverage. To relieve this agonizing mental pressure, the other party will almost always break first. They will begin to over-explain their position, stumble over their words, stutter, and accidentally reveal their hidden motives and deepest strategic insecurities. By withholding your words, you force the entire room to adapt to your specific emotional baseline, establishing absolute authority without ever raising your voice.
To maintain this level of absolute poise under heavy external pressure, you must possess an internal mechanism that instantly sterilizes catastrophic events before they can infect your emotional state. This requires the immediate application of law number 5, cognitive cleaving. The human brain possesses a highly destructive, instinctual tendency to instantly blur the boundary between a cold, objective occurrence and the highly toxic emotional narrative spun by the ego. Okay? If an essential financial investment collapses or a long-term strategic plan falls to pieces, your survival brain does not just process the event as a neutral loss of capital, it immediately translates it into a deeply personalized crisis, generating thoughts of worthlessness, irreversible ruin, and panic. Cognitive cleaving is the violent, immediate separation of raw data from subjective interpretation. You must learn to look at catastrophic failures, broken contracts, and sudden betrayals through the clinical lens of an autopsy surgeon. You completely strip all emotional adjectives from your internal dialogue. You do not tell yourself that a situation is terrible, unfair, or devastating. Instead, you cleave the emotion away and reduce the entire catastrophe down to its base components: a neutral data point, a shifting market variable, or a predictable human behavior. While the untrained masses are completely paralyzed by the emotional narrative of the tragedy, wasting critical days mourning what cannot be changed, your mind operates with pure machine-like clarity. You analyze the raw metrics of the failure, calculate the next optimal move, and execute a counter-strategy while your competitors are still trying to emotionally recover from the shock. However, executing this level of clinical coldness during a crisis is entirely of clinical coldness if your nervous system has been completely softened by modern luxury. This brings us directly to law number 6. Baseline recalibration through controlled friction. The modern attention economy has successfully conditioned the human brain to exist in a state of perpetual neurological hypersensitivity. Because the average individual is constantly surrounded by temperature-controlled rooms, instantaneous digital entertainment, and effortless physical comfort, their baseline threshold for adversity has dropped to absolute zero. When your body is never exposed to physical hardship, your mind instinctively interprets the minor frictions of daily life, a delayed flight, a critical critique from a superior, or a minor social slight, as a full-scale existential emergency. To break this cycle of mental fragility, you must intentionally rig your biological baseline fun. You must intentionally control friction, voluntary discomfort. You must deliberately inject controlled friction into your daily existence. Take freezing showers that shock your nervous system, mind to operate above the primitive screams of physical hunger. Lift weights that push your musculature to absolute failure. And learn to sit completely still in an empty room for hours without a single digital distraction. आकर्षक कंटेंट में बदले और शेयर करें. When you purposefully subject your body and mind to this heavy friction in a controlled environment, you are building highly resilient layers of psychological cornices. You are teaching your amygdala that physical discomfort and acute stress do not signify death. As your neurological baseline recalibrates to survive genuine hardship, your sensitivity to petty modern crises completely evaporates. A man who has looked physical exhaustion, starvation, and profound isolation in the face cannot be manipulated, intimidated, or broken by a passive-aggressive email, a corporate threat, or a petty social exclusion. Your threshold for pain becomes your ultimate unfair advantage over a soft civilization. With your internal baseline completely fortified, you can now deploy the ultimate strategic shield against the tracking mechanisms of modern society. This is law number 7, the ghost strategy. We currently exist inside a deeply hyper-visibility matrix, where individuals feel an obsessive, quasi-religious need to broadcast their every financial win, physical workout, and personal relationship to an audience of digital onlookers. This constant broadcasting is not a sign of strength. It is a loud scream for external validation driven by an empty ego. From a strategic perspective, broadcasting your life is absolute tactical suicide. It leaves your flanks completely exposed, allows your competitors to accurately track your momentum, and gives malicious entities the exact coordinates required to sabotage your trajectory before your goals are fully realized. The dark Stoic rejects the hypervisibility loop entirely and retreats into the absolute safety of the obscurity matrix. You enter ghost mode. You systematically erase your digital footprint. Stop explaining your ambitions to people who possess low-value mindsets and allow your old social circles to assume that you have completely stalled, failed, or vanished into irrelevance. You find immense, intoxicating power in being a living mystery that no one can track, predict, or accurately quantify. While the masses are burning their creative focus to hunt for cheap digital dopamine and applause, you are working in total obscurity. You build your physical form, optimize your financial leverage, and sharpen your strategic skill sets in the absolute dark. By the time the world finally realizes you are playing a high-stakes game, your execution is already complete. Your victory is absolute, and you have vanished back into the shadows before they can even formulate a response. To fully solidify your evolution into a completely unbreachable entity, you must leave behind the superficial techniques of behavioral modification and descend into the deep underbelly of your own subconscious mind. This brings us directly to law number 8, the sublimation of the dark shadow. Mainstream psychology and modern societal programming continuously preach a highly dangerous lie. They tell you that to be a civilized, successful human being, you must completely suppress your aggression, erase your competitive nature, and eliminate your internal rage. They want you to become a perfectly soft, safe, and harmless individual who smiles through disrespect and tolerates substandard treatment. This forced optimization does not make you a good person. It simply transforms you into a highly predictable, passive-aggressive coward whose survival instincts have been completely neutralized. Dark Stoicism offers a vastly superior, far more realistic framework for human empowerment. Your shadow, the cold reservoir of raw aggression, burning ambition, and the deep-seated anger stemming from every single historical instance of disrespect you have ever endured, is not a defect to be cured. It is an immense, volcanic reservoir of pure, unadulterated human energy. You do not throw tantrums, raise your voice, or smash physical objects, because that is a weak, juvenile discharge of power that exposes your lack of self-control. Instead, you execute absolute shadow integration. You take that heavy, dark fire burning directly inside your chest, and you channel it clinically into your daily discipline. You use that raw rage as a high octane fuel to work 3 hours longer than your competitors, to lift weights that terrify your body, and to execute your strategic business goals with absolute cold precision. When you learn to master your inner beast and force it to serve your highest rational intelligence, you become a deeply dangerous adversary because you possess the capacity for extreme power, yet you retain the absolute discipline to keep it perfectly contained until the exact moment of tactical execution. With your internal energy completely harnessed, you must now establish the ultimate protective barrier over your mental kingdom. This is law number 9, the sovereign Epictetan shield. You must draw a ruthless, unyielding boundary line around your active consciousness. The universe, in its infinite chaos, is strictly bifurcated into 2 distinct categories. The very small number of variables that you possess total control over, and the infinite number of variables that belong entirely to external fate. Your thoughts, your current actions, your daily discipline, and your internal emotional responses belong exclusively to you. The volatility of the global economic market, the hidden opinions of your peers, the आकर्षक content में बदले और share करें, and the unpredictable accidents of tomorrow belong entirely to the external world. The absolute second you allow an uncontrollable external variable to disturb your internal baseline, you have committed treason against your own mind. You have willingly breached your own shield. If the economic market crashes, or if an associate walks away from a contract, the untrained mind enters a state of panic, screaming at the sky. The dark Stoic stands perfectly still, resembling a massive stone-she cliffside that the ocean waves crash against continuously. The wave can rage, foam, and strike the cliff with immense force for 10,000 years, but it cannot break the stone. It merely exhausts its own chaotic energy until it dissolves into nothingness. Your mind must become that stone cliffside. Let the external storms of life crash against your perimeter. You do not waste energy trying to alter the ocean. You simply maintain your position, control your response, and keep moving forward with absolute clarity while the wave recedes.
This brings us to the absolute peak of psychological fortification, the ultimate conceptual weapon that instantly destroys all remaining vulnerabilities within your subconscious. This is law number 10, memento mori execution. Every single petty anxiety you currently carry, every instance of social fear you experience, every moment of hesitation that keeps you from seizing power, and your crippling addiction to modern comfort exist because you are suffering from the ultimate human illusion. You foolishly behave as though you have infinite time. You delay your execution, you tolerate mediocrity in your social circle, and you obsess over what irrelevant critics say about you because your brain protects you from the terrifying reality that your personal clock is ticking down with every single heartbeat. Memento mori. Remember that you must die. You must consciously train yourself to look at your daily decisions, your long-term goals, and your interpersonal relationships through the cold, unyielding lens of your own mortality. Imagine your life ending tonight. Suddenly, the passive-aggressive critique from a coworker carries zero weight. Suddenly, the fear of failing at a massive business venture completely evaporates. The desperate need for cheap digital validation and social acceptance instantly dissolves into absolute irrelevance. When you embrace the clinical certainty of your own death, you stop playing small, pathetic games with small-minded people. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions to manifest. You begin to execute your destiny with a dangerous, almost predatory level of urgency because you recognize that the window to build an undeniable legacy is closing forever. We have now traveled through the entire sequence of the Inner Citadel, arriving back at the hidden psychological mechanism we introduced at the very beginning of this journey. The ultimate secret to becoming completely unshakable lies in understanding how to transform absolute isolation from a painful prison of loneliness into an asymmetric weapon of total dominance. The modern matrix thrives on hyper-connectivity. It demands that you remain constantly accessible, perpetually plugged into the collective noise, and emotionally tied to the trends of the crowd. When you execute these 10 dark laws, you are effectively cutting the power cord to that matrix. You enter a state of psychological sovereignty so absolute that it terrifies the average person. Your sudden absence from the standard social dynamics, your icy refusal to offer emotional reactions, and your machine-like execution in total obscurity create an immense, destabilizing vacuum. The social matrix around you cannot handle a variable it cannot track, predict, or manipulate. While the masses continue to fragment their focus, chasing cheap validation and crumbling under the slightest external pressure, you stand as a completely unified, independent entity. You have mastered the ultimate competitive advantage in a dying civilization, absolute internal stillness combined with ruthless external execution. The trap of the matrix has lost its hold over you. You are no longer a puppet to external stimuli. You are entirely sovereign, completely detached, and utterly unshakable. True transformation is a quiet, continuous evolution that takes place far away from the applause of the crowd. To systematically realign your cognitive baseline, anchor your mindset in advanced strategic frameworks, and access deep psychological breakdowns designed for absolute self-mastery, consider subscribing to Silent Power Psychology. Which specific external trigger, whether it is a peer's disrespect, the pursuit of digital validation, or a recurring trauma from your past, do you find hardest to flatline, and what is the primary obstacle holding you back from entering ghost mode to conquer it?